So, um, let's see. I guess we should start with some
Afternoon, James.
good. Hey. I guess we'll start with some introductions. My name is James Castañeda. This is my almost the end of my third year working for MacPhail. My primary instrument is the cello, but I also teach some like beginning violin. Have taught viola and beginning bass before. Um, and I'm also teaching some group beginning guitar and ukulele lessons as well. Before I was at MacPhail, I was an elementary school music teacher in Washington, D.C. I did general music, had an after school choir with them, and then started an orchestra program with my fourth and fifth graders as well. And joining me today is Greg Byers. Greg, you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I also am a multi-instrumentalist, but my primary instrument is cello. Um, I play bass, a little guitar. I dabble a little bit on violin and viola, anything with strings. I've been working for MacPhail for about a year. Um, and let's see, I've lived in the Twin Cities for about 10 years as a full-time musician. And just performer, composer, educator, recording artist, all that good stuff.
Awesome. So I know for me, I especially like talking about the bass. I took about a semester's worth of lessons with a classmate at the University of Wisconsin, and I feel pretty comfortable on the instrument up to like a high school level, but I haven't really studied it or definitely not like performed professionally or anything like that. And I know Greg, you have a little bit more of a background on the bass too. Do you want to just share a little bit
Well,
with
oh
that?
yeah, I'll tell that story. So I started playing cello in the Suzuki method when I was 2.5 years old. So that was kind of my base point for everything, and it was very classically
Cello
oriented.
point.
Yes, yeah, cello point.
Sorry.
And so, um, as I as I went through grade school, I started to get into more to other styles other than classical, starting to get into jazz, and was reaching out to different groups as a high schooler to try to learn jazz on cello. And I was at the Hochstein School of Music, which was still open in Rochester, New York, where I'm from, great nonprofit music school. And I was in a jazz ensemble, and one day the bassist didn't show up. So I was like, oh, I'll just kind of plunk around on the low end of the cello and make it work. And my teacher, Richard Delaney, at the time said, "You need to pick up bass. You're going to get way more gigs if you play bass." And I was like, "Oh, I don't want to do it to get gigs. I want to do it for the love of this genre of music and because I want to be a great musician and a versatile musician and like all these very altruistic things." And then at the end of the day, he was kind of right. I get more gigs as a bassist, you know? Um, not, I mean, I love cello. Cello is my primary passion, but there's simply the demand for upright bassists, for bass guitarists, is completely different. So for me, picking up the bass came out of simply it was an integral instrument to jazz and a lot of other modern styles of music that I really was fascinated with when there weren't necessarily cellists in that genre that I could emulate. Um, and then when I went to University of Miami, I graduated on both cello and bass as a double major in classical and jazz, and that really got my bass chops together. Um, have I had bass lessons there, more jazz bass lessons than classical, but on both instruments. Um, and I actually ended up I played cello in the orchestra until I played upright bass in the wind ensemble at University of Miami, which was a really great experience and extraordinarily different from orchestra because you're the only string instrument in the room and you're the only bass player on your part. And so it was a very different sort of mindset. The Had to really get my act together for that one, you know. And then after that, really tried to um, shape my career as somebody that was equally capable on both instruments. Although cello is still my favorite because I've been playing it the longest. You know.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. Let's see. I think um, like for me, I think we could talk about maybe switching. Like, what was it like when you first picked up the bass for the first time after having so much background on cello? I know for me, um, it was kind of just fun. Obviously, the size of it of an upright bass is
Mhm.
was the craziest thing to get used to. And then apart from that, you've got different bow angles, and the fourths always threw me for a loop. I can't,
That was
the number of times I
that
put
was
a fourth finger on the D string was tough. Yeah.
a couple things. Yeah, the fourth tuning going. But I used to have my bass lessons right after my cello lessons in college, and so it would totally just like my brain would tweak for and I would be like, oh, if I cross the string and put my fourth finger down, I will get this note, and that was not the note that came out.
Hmm.
Just little things like that, but it also helped doing those things back to back. That sort of brain confusion really helped me now when I have a neck in my hand. That upright bass neck it has such a different mass and size and feel to it. It's a little more automatic, like, oh, yep, okay. And then getting this constant, half step space between the first and second finger to have equal distance between first, second, and second, fourth. That was a
Yes.
little disorienting at first.
Hmm.
Um, and then the weirder thing for me, I was encouraged to start more on bass guitar, even though I was a cellist, which was an even larger jump in a certain way because you're completely changing the angle of your left hand, frets, amplified instruments, all these other things that I think when you start out on one of the basses and move to the other, it's not as drastic of a change. But I think when it's something like when I was coming from cello, jumping to bass guitar felt just as um, sort of not confusing, but just unfamiliar in the beginning.
Yeah. Um, this is just kind of a random question. When you started learning, I guess you said you started on electric bass. Were you primarily were you reading notes like on the staff? Were you reading tabs? What was that? Or were you like not even reading? Was it mostly by ear?
First of all, how dare you insinuate I read tabs, James? How dare you? No tabs for life. All right, sheet music or die. Uh, no, so I wasn't doing tabs, but you make a good point. A lot of what I was doing was looking at lead sheets. So a lot of the lead sheets would just have chord symbols, and what I was practicing, since I was practicing jazz, was the role that the bass plays in jazz usually, which is a walking bass line. And so a lot of that wasn't necessarily like reading parts out. That being said, because I was a cellist, I was already getting books in bass clef. And so that translated over. So, I love the Omni book by Charlie Parker. So I actually got that to work on playing bass and walking bass lines on that. And my teacher at the time was like, "Oh, don't worry about learning the solos. You won't be able to do that." And I was like, "I'm gonna play those on cello. Let's do that." Um, so, so a little bit of reading, a lot more just um, looking at lead sheets, interpreting the chords, practicing walking bass lines, practicing written bass lines.
Yeah. Okay. Um,
Hmm.
I just know I asked that question because I know when I picked up a guitar in like maybe fifth grade or sixth grade, um, after I've been playing cello since second grade, so I knew how to read music and everything. But I started guitar with tabs, so shame on me.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm
I
not.
actually um, but I to this day I think if you showed me some guitar music on a staff, I would. My brain can't handle it. Like I can name all the
That's
notes, but
Yeah. That's another story. That's
where's
another.
the D string on my guitar is tough for me. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that what most people don't recognize is that bass is a transposing instrument because when you write something in bass clef, a bass reads it down an octave. And I didn't even realize that for a while until I like really put two and two together, and I was like, yeah, that's the same F, but they're not sounding the same on both instruments.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Um,
Yeah.
but so, something that I find interesting, and we can both sort of answer this, what sort of techniques, what sort of skills did you find carry over from whether it's guitar or bass back to cello, or were there any skills on cello that transferred the other way around? I know for me, one of the big ones is pizzicato was totally changed by the fact that I picked up bass and took it seriously. And on bass guitar, that's all you got. That's it. And so
Mm-hmm.
where my finger was on the string, really thinking about that contact point and how that changes the tone, where on my finger or what finger I was using, all these little things where in classical cello it's just one style of pizzicato and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
All the bass stuff and even my little guitar dabbling helped me sort of work on like thumb, index, middle ring sort of stuff, independent finger exercises.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what you found.
Yeah. I mean, so I think one big thing is like just the physical act of like holding a string down and getting a good tone. Um, like that skill transferred. Like after playing a cello, I figured that out in second grade. So when I picked up a guitar, that part was no problem. And like my finger dexterity, I think like the first song I learned on guitar was Blackbird, and I just like looked up a tab,
You're just
and
like, oh
it
yeah,
wasn't hard for me to move my fingers like that because I had already been shifting and playing different things on the cello. Um, so that skill, I think, like if for people who maybe are playing the cello and thinking about picking up something else, the kind of mechanics for the left hand are really similar. Obviously, as you start getting into chords and different hand shapes, things start getting a little bit different. But that kind of very basic, like beginning, here's how you play a guitar, that came like really naturally. Um, it's interesting that you brought up like the pizzicato because I think that's probably the biggest thing. Like when I picked up a bass and for the first time and I'm plucking the strings, I'll stand a little bit so you can see my finger, but doing this, right? Um, my my friend who was also my bass teacher is like just laughed at me and said, "You pluck like a cellist." And then of course he talked to me about using more finger, using a fatter part of the finger, um, things like plucking through the string instead of kind of plucking upwards. So when I went back to cello, then like you said, like just starting to experiment with different types of pizzicato and different, I don't know, rotations of my fingers.
absolutely. How much fat on that finger you're using? Absolutely,
Mhm.
dude.
Or even like two fingers at the same time.
Or thumb.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, I guess that was the biggest thing. You talked a little bit about like thumb, index, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How has, and maybe this comes a little bit more from guitar, but how has that kind of translated into your cello playing?
Oh yeah, definitely comes from guitar. So my guitar dabbling was even more serendipitous. My dad had a beautiful 1968 Martin that even as a non-guitarist, I would pick it up and plunk at it and be like, "Oh, this is a really nice instrument." And he wanted to sell it when I was in high school, and I was like, "Nope, I play guitar now. You can't sell it. That's my guitar. I play guitar now." So I had to actually like attempt to play guitar at that point. Um, and definitely um, thing I feel like cello, and tell me if you agree with this. I feel like cello can be a very steep learning curve when you start as a beginner, especially if you don't have any other musical grounding. And so, going to guitar, I was like, what's with these frets, man? This is cheating. This is easy. But there's definitely other things about guitar that are far more difficult, in my personal opinion, right? I One big thing, something that because I mess around with a lot of eclectic styles on cello, just doing a little research into that thumb, index, ring, middle, and various just simple exercises that you can do, and how that might be expressed in a song, right? Um, I don't I don't know if I need to get my cello to actually do that right now, but right, um, building those skills on guitar where it's almost expected that you can do some finger picking stuff like that, and where the
Hmm.
intonation is set and you don't have to worry about your intonation, and the fingerboard's not curved. You don't have to work as hard to get that beautiful tone out of all six notes of the guitar. Little things like that in terms of working on the finger style, getting a good sound out of chords, really helped when I brought it back to cello. I knew, like, okay, if I want this B major chord on my cello to sound full, I have to work a lot harder because I don't have those frets because of the curved fingerboard.
Hmm.
But I knew more of like what that ideal end sound would be, and then it's just a matter of getting the instrument to express like you're trying to get it to.
Yeah.
So, a couple of those things.
Um, yeah, I think I don't know. Playing chords on the cello is I think probably an interesting thing to talk about because it's not. I mean, you'll see it in classical music. You know, like the beginning of like hide and C major. You got lots of
Belt
rolling
guard.
chords, right?
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of like if we talk about like comping on a cello,
Hmm.
um, like figuring out those different shapes was really at first like really hard for me. Um, even like getting like a barred fifth in tune
Yeah. Hmm.
um,
Totally.
is really tricky. Um, so I don't. Do you have any? Do you have any like tips or maybe just some more specific like maybe a story or something from that experience of trying to get those chords really going on the
Yeah,
cello?
I think that part of it is, um, I think, and this is a great thing of what like bass taught me. Like we're talking about, bass is such a big instrument. Bass really helped me round out my ability to get a clear, full sound with that left hand with the least amount of grip,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so on, especially on cello, because of where the neck is, we get a little bit more angle. Um, when I return to that, when I'm doing chords and I have to press down multiple notes, really trying to use just the gravity in my arm, the weight of my arm, allow that to hang off the neck, because it is very easy to overtax the left hand when we're playing chords.
Yes.
Extremely easy because our instrument is just not, the cello is not set up for it
Mm-hmm.
for like lengthy periods of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for me, something I think about is some of it is endurance. You know what I mean? If I know
Yeah.
I'm going to have to play a 20-minute version of a song and it's just me and somebody else, I might just more play bass lines and sneak some other notes in
Mm-hmm.
occasionally because I know I can, like, my hand's going to hold out. If I'm like straight, we're playing in D flat and I have to be playing no open string chords for 20 minutes, it's going to be a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but one big thing is, I'm not gonna sweat um, if I'm getting. I just sort of treat it slightly less like a guitar and more just like it's a cello we're strumming right now. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes what I'll do is, as opposed to playing straight chords, I'll arpeggiate something, and that means I can have a little moment. Let's just say I'm playing whatever shape, right? I can give a finger a little break if I'm plucking like boom, 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 boom. I can give a finger a little break if I don't have
Mm-hmm.
that full perfect sustain like we might on a guitar, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, or just coming up with little approaches and tactics that way. Um, the other big thing for chords, I mean, dude, we could go on about this all day. I could totally
Mm-hmm.
go on about it. But I will say the big thing that really helped me was doing jazz theory and talking to pianists about the simplest voicings for chords. And at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, um, in a more colorful context, the most important notes that we need are the root to set the foundation,
Mm-hmm.
the the third and the seventh to set the chord quality. The fifth is actually not as important as you might imagine because it is mostly implied through where we place the third and the seventh. So I am not going to get any deeper on the theory than that, but essentially understanding the most effective voicings for chords with the least amount of notes, really having a good grasp on that greatly helps because then I don't have to worry about playing a 4-note chord. I can play a 2-note chord, and if there's a bass player, I know that those 3 notes are going to come together and flesh out all the harmony we need.
Yeah. So in terms of like a 2-note chord, maybe you're just finding that some sort of shape in those, maybe the D string and the A string for like.
Okay, I'm gonna get my cello now, so because I can totally.
Yeah.
Cool. So, for me, you know, a 2-note chord can be something as simple as like tension, resolution. Right? And so all I'm doing there, I'm not actually playing the roots. I'm playing a G dominant chord with the F and the bottom and the B on the top. And so the F, the 7, B, the 3rd. And then I just voice lead them to their natural resolution, which would be a C chord. The B goes up to the C, and the F goes down to the E. And so I think it's actually a lot easier for pianists because you see the whole keyboard, you can see how these notes are going to move through chords, and you can play 8 notes, no problem. No worries about intonation, no worries about any of that.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, though, if I can just use those 2 strings to imply the harmony that I want, then that's huge. And that makes it so much easier for me to control what I need to control on the instrument.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, really, really basic thing that I sort of discovered that's different from guitar most of the time. Because we're built in fifths, we generally build chords in open voicings, and guitars have a mix of open and closed voicings. So I probably should explain what that means, right?
Yes, okay, that's what I was going to say.
So an open voicing, or rephrase, sorry. A close voicing or closed voicing is where all the notes in the chord are as close together as possible. So the only chord that really works on cello for that is like D major. Here's my D major close voicing. So I'm playing the D on my G string. Okay? This is a really awkward voicing. It is not easy for us to put consecutive thirds on our instrument because we're tuned in fifths. So a much easier D major voicing is going to be built on fifths and sixths. Or those are actually really the same voicings. A perfect fifth, and then the third, a 10th up. So, a couple, I mean, yeah, I'll keep going on this. A couple things, like we talked about, just one thing that I really worked on, a lot of moments, you want that guitar sort of sustain. So thinking about how I can keep my shoulder relaxed, my elbow down, and I can get a nice sustain, not necessarily by like, choking my neck. And then you'll notice I was using my thumb there, right?
Yeah.
We talked about this a little bit. What part of our finger or what finger we're using drastically changes our sound. And to me, guitars have a brightness that make it so that when you're using other fingers and a sustain, when you're using all these other fingers, like that tonal difference is a little less obvious to me on guitar, simply because of the nature of the instrument. Here, like, versus like, it's a very different sort of tone.
Yeah.
So I think keeping that in mind, and I mentioned it a little bit, just not we have to realize that our sustain is not going to be the same as a guitar. And so what can we do to make that, to our benefit? So maybe or if I want to do my correct thumb, index, middle ring finger, or whatever. So, but right, just playing around with those differences, and I think not trying to have your expectation be, I'm perfectly emulating a guitar.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if I think about a guitar part and I say, okay, so like I want to play a bluegrass guitar part with the bass part, so I'm going to put the bass on beats 1 and 3. I'm going to put some chinks on beats 2 and 4. Or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So, right, I can get something that's very close to that, right? But I have to I really have to think it out. And I mean, I guess that's true on guitar too. But really just letting it be like, we're going to mimic this, but it is not the same thing. And we're going to have to deal with our own idiosyncrasies on the instrument, right?
Yeah. So one thing you said earlier, which kind of like, oh gosh, it's a terrible pun, struck a chord with me, was talking about this idea of gravity, right?
Yeah.
And holding down your strings. And that concept, that skill, I mean, I definitely like learned it growing up playing the cello, but I don't think I really truly internalized it until I was older and at the University of Wisconsin and taking lessons and really trying to figure out chords. So a lot of the things, I mean, that go into that, and I'll maybe move my camera a little bit, but there's all this stuff going on here in your shoulder and your upper arm and even like your wrist. So there's all these things I kind of had to figure out, like, we talk about this, chicken wing or inflating your armpit balloon or whatever you want to call it. But that's like really essential for getting this gravity in. And when you're playing chords, depending on the shape, you might have to throw some like different angles into your arm too.
Truth.
So do you have any, I don't know, any tips or revelations or even maybe any exercises for like trying to really grasp and get like a visceral kind of like internal understanding of what that feeling is like?
I have a word, and I think you and I might have talked about this a little bit elsewhere. And I think if we put a word to this sensation, it greatly helps talk about it, feel it, analyze it. The word is proprioception.
Could you say that again?
I am going to say that again. Proprioception. Okay.
I really want to. I'm just
You're
gonna.
gonna Google this?
No, I'm gonna. I think we should. I'm just gonna do it on a blank tab on Google.
Okay.
Could you? Oh, you know what? We have a whiteboard. Could you spell that word for me?
Yes.
Go for it.
P-R-O-P-R-E. Oh man, I gotta think about this. P-R-I. Proprio. And then ception, like C-E-P-T-I-O-N.
Proprioception. And I'm going to put it all in caps because it seems like a word that could be all in caps.
You should say it like it's in all caps. That's definitely...
Proprioception.
That's the one.
Okay, so tell us about proprioception.
Proprioception is a sense in our body that is interconnected with the other normal 5 senses that we talk about, but it's also very different and very important for our everyday lives. I love this exercise. To demonstrate my proprioception, I am going to not hit myself in the face. Okay? I'm going to not hit myself in the face right now. Are you ready for this? Here we go. I close my eyes. Can't see anything. Here's my hand. That was close. Oh yeah. Oh, I actually got myself there. Awesome. Uh, so, um, how am I able to not hit myself in the face with my eyes closed?
Proprioception.
Exactly. Now, the most of the time when I bring this up to students, they think about it, and sometimes people will say touch, right? But theoretically, if I did that correctly the whole time, I never touched myself.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I know where my hand is in space in relationship to my face? Proprioception. It is our concept of where our body is in physical space at any moment, and it has nothing to do with your sight, it has nothing to do with your touch, it has nothing to do with any other sense, and it is so valuable to put name to that sense when we work with instruments, when we work in body mechanics. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's so helpful to be able to bring ourselves into that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're talking about how I sort of practice some of this stuff. I will tell you how it came about for me. I was exhausted. I was I was squeezing. I would play through a Bach prelude and I would be totally bushwhacked. And
Mm-hmm.
both hands, I'd barely be able to hold my bow. My
Yeah.
left hand would just be in agony. And like, okay, let's be real. For some of those Bach etudes, like, or sorry, for the suites, like, they're challenging. They are physically challenging, but this was beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that I had to figure out a way. I mean, even if I wanted to just enjoy playing the pieces, I had to figure out a way where I wasn't just going to be totally spent,
Yeah.
um, and having, like, totally shot. Especially right here, you know what I'm talking about? The outside of the hand right there.
Yep.
Yep, that was a big
Yep.
problem. And so I was just like, if I'm if I'm going to be playing whatever, how many hours a day, if I'm going to be doing this regularly, I need to play more relaxed. Um, so, um, in terms of specific exercises, um, I think part of it is simply as a warm up, whether it's bass, whether it's and actually more for upright bass. When I pick up my upright bass, I like to warm up nice and slow and really sort of like sink into every string,
Mm-hmm.
first finger, second finger, and everything else down. Really just sort of feeling where that sweet spot is for where I'm going to get a good sound and trying to find right on that, on the money for that. So let's play the C. So, okay, that's not enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not sounding. Okay, so I'm there. I'm just going to think about just allowing my arm to hang, and it's a little low for the G string, so I'm going to put that balloon like you talked about on there just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like to close my eyes. I like to remove that sense and really feel just. And I'm putting my thumb up here. You can see I'm
Mm-hmm.
not actually squeezing with that hand at all. It's
Mm-hmm.
much more just allowing all of this to come down. Um, do you have any exercises you like for this? This is a good question.
Um, I mean, I think I was gonna bring up the thumb thing. Um,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that it was probably my first. I mean, maybe even my first lesson, but definitely the first couple months of playing cello, like in a university setting. My professor said, "Can you play that without your thumb?" And I tried, and I could not play it without my thumb. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think that is like, I mean, if you are really squeezing with your thumb, like you no longer have a crutch, so you've really got to figure out the arm weight thing. Um,
One other thing, just
yeah.
for me, when I studied at McNally Smith College of Music for my master's, I worked with Thomas Rosenberg, and he kind of like made me completely redo my vibrato. And one of the things about his vibrato, he literally took a piece of painter's tape and we taped it on the back of my neck, and he's like, "All right, when you're vibrating, it's the motion for this vibrato is from your elbow as opposed to like this sort of vibrato."
Yep.
So when he said, when you're vibrating, if your thumb isn't moving, you're doing this wrong. And you cannot be pressing down if you're doing this vibrato. So he would have me practice vibrato, and I'll turn the neck a little bit. You could hear your thumb on the painter's tape back there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so that vibrato work was actually also great practice for me to like totally get rid of that locked thumb, which I think we all sort of a lot of us just start out like, there's no other way to make sound than just locking our thumb, choking the neck. So
yeah. I mean, one other thing that is helpful for me, but maybe this isn't helpful for anyone. I really liked physics in high school. So like even just thinking of your neck like this, and then your arm is a force diagram. It's that arrow going straight through your neck, right? So if your neck is tilted, then that force arrow needs to go this way, right? Or, on a guitar, it's got to come towards you.
Yeah, on a bass, it's the same thing. Like, my bass guitar, comes in towards my body a little bit because I'm that sort of force, right?
Yeah. Well, I think we're a little bit over our official time here.
How dare we?
I know, goodness. So we should.
Should we have a final thought?
Gosh. I don't know. I wonder if we could. Sorry, that was my dog.
I'm gonna have a final thought.
Yeah, you have your final thought.
I would like to say to anybody out there that is considering picking up a third or whatever instrument, I think the benefits there's a lot of benefits. There's a lot of things that I personally have learned about my primary instrument by studying other instruments. And even further away than a string instrument, like my incredibly small amount of drum practice has helped me so much with talking to drummers, because I actually it's like, okay, this is what you can do on a drum set. This is what you cannot do, and so I feel like having a small amount of knowledge to really be able to talk to other musicians about their instrument. As a composer, it makes such a big difference to have some knowledge of that. And then I think that the only thing that I have to caution people on is that you don't stretch yourself too thin, because I think a large part of what becoming a great musician is perfecting elements of our craft. And so if we are playing 12 instruments and you're practicing each one 5 minutes a day, I'm not sure we have enough time to really sink our teeth into one. But for me, because I really focused on the cello and tried to perfect these musical elements on the cello, it made so much sense when I then tried to transfer that and say, how do I do this on bass? How do I do this on guitar? Etc., etc.
Yeah.
Highly encouraged, but don't spread yourself too thin.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think the only thing I was gonna say is just if you're thinking about trying another instrument, pick it up. Especially if you're a cellist, string instruments are gonna be not too crazy for you to kind of pick up and just go for it. I do agree with the caution though. So it's nice to have your kind of bass, and then there's a little guitar over here, or your cello, right?
Absolutely. But now, my career wouldn't be the same if I didn't pick up bass when I was 17 or 18. And not just because of the playing bass part, but because of sort of opportunities that those gigs created, or just knowledge of the cello, and like we talked about, techniques and concepts I brought over from bass that no cello teacher was talking to me about, So, fantastic. What a great coffee talk.
Yeah. Well,
coffee over there?
Coffee cheers.
Coffee cheers. Virtual
All
cheers.
right. We'll see ya.
Everybody out there. Take
All
care.
right. Thank you, everybody. Oh, and if you have any questions, feel free to email us or whatever. Our emails are on MacPhail. Mine is castañeda.james@macphail.org.
Mine is byers.greg@macphail.org.
Awesome. And hopefully you can see our names in our Zoom windows. So, all
Awesome.
right.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah, have a good one.